point did we begin to use those symbols?
When Gentile Christianity became the primary focus in Christianity. And this is a thing we can't ever forget. Early Christianity is a Jewish sect. And theoretically, we are a Jewish sect. Yes?
Well, some of the symbols I've heard were because people were illiterate, and the symbols helped them learn some of the theology and stuff.
Symbols in the Gentile world are part of the Mysterion. And, this isn't a class specifically about the Mysterion. I just want to make sure Mysterion concepts are very, are clear. Because if you label the Mysterion concepts, baptism, sacred meal, robing, names, symbols, all these are common to Teen Hodos. Baptism is the mikvah, the sacred meal is the Passover, which in Christianity became the Eucharistic meal. The robing, generally for example, Orthodox Church, they take off all your clothes. You're naked when you are baptized, and then they robe you in white. In most of our churches, when we baptize, guess what we do? We robe in white, right? Names, we give a name. Baptism is what gives you your name. That is common to Mysterions. This is pre-Christianity. Symbols. Symbols were not Teen Hodos. Teen Hodos does not do symbols. Judaism does not do symbols. What do symbols indicate? Gentiles, and that rather, and this is what I've been pointing out to you before, that I think Christ makes a very strong point in Gospel of Matthew specifically, that the point of the church, and this is either a reflection, I think it's a reflection of his ideas specifically, but when Matthew was writing this, one of the most important points was that Christianity was infiltrating the Mysterions. And so the indication that Christianity is infiltrating the Mysterions is guess what they did? They took on everything that made them look like a Mysterion. And so Teen Hodos couldn't do that. Do you see that? Teen Hodos could not accept symbols because that is against Jewish law, Judaistic law. And so Mysterions took on that. And remember I told you before, Paul lost. Paul wanted the sacred meal to be a Passover every time, which meant it included meat. But eventually our sacred meal became much more like the Mysterions' meal in general. Although Mysterions did include many times meat. Mysterions included sacrifice and meat, which is interesting too. But
when Jesus had the Passover supper with the disciples, they didn't have meat then.
Oh yeah, they did. Big time.
Okay.
There's no way it would be a Passover supper without meat. Unless you want to buy, well, even the Essenes. That's the thing with the Essenes. Essenes were sacrificing outside the temple in Jerusalem.
But then how do we focus on just the bread and the wine?
Ah, John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom, about 200 AD. Remember, what did the Council of Antioch tell the early Gentiles? Don't eat sacrifice to idols, and don't do fornication. And so that's basically a synopsis of the Noetic Creed. And so basically all meat, except at the temple, and kosher meat that was killed by Jewish butchers, would be considered sacrificed to idols. All meat was sacrificed to idols in the ancient world. So there's no way that Gentiles could get meat for a sacred meal. And after the temple was destroyed, there's no way that the Jews could get meat that was appropriate for the Passover. So John Chrysostom, Paul lost. Paul wanted everyone to be able to eat meat at the sacred meals. Paul lost.
Because he said no matter what, it doesn't matter.
That's right. Paul said, remember, it doesn't matter, but the Council of Antioch said don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. And so this was a warring problem in the early church. Should you eat meat, or should you, because all meat was sacrificed to idols, right, except at the temple and by kosher butchers. And kosher butchers, okay, hard to find, all right, in the ancient world. So you have a problem here. John Chrysostom solved this problem in 200 AD in the Church of Antioch because John Chrysostom invented the Mass. He invented the Christian Mass, the Eucharistic Mass, to bless the meat or bless the bread and the wine.
So at that point, they went back into Matthew and deleted the portion about the meat.
No, it was never. Matthew just says the Passover, and a Passover has to have meat. That's why we don't call the Eucharist a Passover. It's not a Passover. Passover has to have meat. And even the Jews today, what did they do to represent the meat?
They have chicken.
No, they don't have chicken.
They have
And
a
lamb.
lamb shank on the table.
They have a shank of a lamb on the table. They always have a bone of a lamb on the table.
Well, they still eat it, don't they?
No, they don't eat meat.
lamb.
Oh, they don't?
Just kind of
No,
on it.
they cannot eat the Passover, and they do not eat lamb on that day for that reason.
Symbolic.
Yeah.
All their seders, they have all kinds of, they have roasted egg, they have the haricot, they have all kinds of things.
That's why they're called
Symbolic.
seders instead of Passovers. It's a Passover seder, but it represents the Passover, but it's not a true Passover. So, in any case, yeah, don't you wish? No chicken. But let's finish this up. So, you remember the irony chapters, and that's represented by chapter 24 here, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and 3, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, tell us, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your near being and of the consummation of the age? And literally this means, when will this happen? What will be the sign of your parousia, your being near, and the sudetella, the entire completion of this aeon, this time and period? What, in other words, is the beginning of the Messianic era? And then we get the irony chapters in which Jesus tells us literally those things. And now we enter into the narratives, and I want to focus this. 34 in that same chapter, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until these things have happened. And 35, the point about heaven and earth will pass away or come close that you can't tell the difference, and yet my words will never literally become so close together that you can't understand them. So, with this, then we can enter into the narrative of the Passion, because the Passion narrative follows this fifth discourse. So, in 20 on 26, when the evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and they were eating. And he said, I tell the truth, one of you will betray me. Literally, it's perdomai, yield me up. So here's a clear statement of Jesus. Jesus said what? One of you will betray me. Now look at the response from the disciples. They were sad. And they began to say to him, one after the other, surely not I, Lord. What is this show? Look, if I told you that one of you is going to pull out a gun and shoot me, would you be sitting there, okay, if you didn't have a gun in your pocket and you weren't going to shoot me, would you be sitting there thinking, who's going to shoot this guy? No, you wouldn't be thinking that. Why are they thinking this way? What is making them think this way? How are they thinking? Well, we call it D-rash thinking, but in reality, this is more than D-rash thinking. There's only one word for this type of thinking. They have an absolute pagan mindset, because what are they believing is the cause? What's the cause? Fate. One of them is fated. And they're not sure which one. You see? If you're living under the idea of pagan irrationality, okay, you can call it D-rash thinking, that's a reasonable way, but D-rash thinking is even more rational than pagan thinking. But if you're thinking under pagan thinking, all of you believe that someone is fated in this room to shoot me with a gun. And whether you have a gun or not, or whether you think you're going to do it or not, is immaterial, because you're fated. So no matter what, that gun is going to appear, and you're going to do it. Do you see this? That is an absolute irrational view. But you know, that is their view right now. That's after all this teaching, all this logical training, all this training. Do you see why Jesus was mad at them in the irony chapters? He's sitting right in front of them, and they're asking him, well, when are you coming? Literally, when are you going to be near to us? Say,
Well, when would a bunch of good Jews have gotten this pagan thinking?
because they were Hellenized. They spoke Greek. They're speaking Greek. They're absolutely Hellenized. They've been Hellenized before, well before 175 BC. Okay? They are a Hellenized worldview people. They happen to mix that with Dirash, which makes it even worse. Because you got Dirash mixed with a pagan worldview. And this illustrates it. Because you don't understand this, do you? I mean, before I pointed this out, you read it, every time you read this, you go, what's wrong with these guys?
Yeah, why don't they know?
Are they idiots?
Yeah, why don't they know?
Right?
They're not gonna be the ones.
Every time we read about the parables, especially in Mark, where it says, and the disciples didn't understand, we go, they didn't understand what? Are they stupid? Because our worldview is Greek rational. Because we come out of a Christian worldview. Christian worldview is Greek rational worldview. This was a worldview that Jesus was teaching throughout Matthew. This is a worldview that he's trying to get the disciples to get a hold of. Their responses get even more irrational. Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl will be with me, will betray me. This is a completely logical statement. It's a statement that defies full understanding, because we'd wonder, how does he know? Does he know because he knows human nature? Is it prophetic in nature? Is it because he's God? Is it because of this, because of that? We can't answer that question. We can guess at the answer, but he makes a literal, logical statement. If I made that statement, whoever dips, this in, right? We would go, okay.
Well, in the movie, same time that Jesus dipped his in, so did Judas. So Judaism at this time had some of the same problems with secularism that we're having today, where outside society is infiltrating and...
You could look at it, I would look at it differently. The way I would look at it is, what did the Mysterion do for Christianity?
allowed it to grow and flourish.
Make it acceptable.
Made acceptable, allowed to flourish, allowed to grow. Christianity would never be what it is today if the Mysterion ideas were not already existent since 500 BC. What is Greek rationalism to Christianity?
The means of spreading the word.
Well, it's more than that. It's the proof text. It's the proof text of Christianity. Christianity says that it doesn't matter what you think or believe. What matters is what happened historically. And therefore we get 4 accounts, historical accounts, which happen to be Greek rational documents, which are logos to telos type documents, very complex Greek documents, whose all 4 of them are culminated, the telos is culminated in the resurrection of Christ. The Egerio from Necros. And so this is true of Matthew also. So Matthew being a thesis, and that's what I put, it's a thesis that is a beautiful Greek thesis, logos to telos thesis, whose telos is the resurrection. Actually, the telos is what it means within the context of the resurrection. If you are a fate view, if you are a pagan worldview, what does a resurrection mean?
Kind of stand your world on them.
Well, it'll stand your world on it, but it doesn't mean a whole lot, because in the world, what can the gods are fated, right? And fate means that things like this could happen, right? But what does it mean within a rational Greek worldview, or a Christian rational worldview? Well, it's historical. There's all kinds of miracles that we have recorded in history, both secular, there's no such thing as an ancient secular source, all right? There's no such thing as an ancient secular source. All ancient documents have some religious concept within them, all right? From the plays to the documents that are written by Theodocles, every single one, including the philosophical documents. The purpose in the philosophical documents was basically to establish within their minds theology, because the Greeks did not understand the difference between theology or philosophy. They thought they were the same, which is okay, that's a neat view. The point, however, is that in a Greek rational worldview, it doesn't matter that something is a miracle. What matters is that it occurred. If you say it's a miracle, what do you say? What are you basically implying? Well, it occurred by a deity, right?
Supernatural.
Supernatural cause. Whether it happened by a supernatural cause or not, it happened. And so the point of the resurrection is that points out something that is outside of what?
The human realm.
Outside the nature of. Remember the Greek view? Everything is this. So the plenum of the universe, the plenum of everything is this. And God is part of the plenum of everything. And the created is the cosmos. That's the created universe. And within that is philosophia, which man can know. And within that is the world, or what we can experience. So if something happens like a resurrection, okay, that is still within the cosmos, but it's obviously outside of philosophia and all these obviously outside of the realm of the world, right? The created world, sarx. So what does that imply? It implies, well, that someone who's empowered outside of the cosmos did it. This is the same thing about the Big Bang. You know, the Big Bang proves God. Because what happened to cause the Big Bang? Right? The creation of the universe. What caused the creation of the universe? Well, we give a flip answer. Well, God. The point is that that's the cosmos. Before the cosmos, what existed?
Nothing.
Well, actually, it's not nothing. It's the plenum of everything. It is the realm that is God, that is everything, that is infinite, right? And when God created, he created the bounds of the cosmos. The Greeks, this is a Greek thought. This, by the way, happens to be our thought too, right? This is what we believe. And it's not a question of belief. The Big Bang proves it. Because you have to have a cause. And I use the Big Bang as a great secular example. You can use it with your secular friends, right? Because they won't talk to you about seven-day creation, but they'll talk to you about the Big Bang, right? You go up with a seven-day creation, your friends that are secular are going to say, you're a nut. But if you go up and you talk about the Big Bang and the telic cause of the Big Bang, what caused the Big Bang? Right? See? You can use that very well. But the point is that this is all Greek thought. The idea of a resurrection becomes important because it points out something outside of the created, outside of philosophy and outside the world, which implies there is something being. And it implies that, well, from a Christian standpoint, you know, who resurrected Christ? God, but who is Christ? Also God. See? So, the resurrection itself stands as a wonderful... Anybody else resurrected in the history of the world? There's no historical accounts of anybody resurrecting in the history of the world. Even these guys that died, died in the operating table and came back, we wouldn't say they resurrected. Because how long does it take you to die? 3 days or so. About 48 hours before all cellular death. See? So this is a very important concept. Anyway, Jesus Christ's logical statement. The Son of Man will go, this is 24, let's see, 26, 24. Woe to him who betrays him. Then Judas, one who would betray him, said, surely not I. And Jesus answered, yes, it's you. And what did the disciples say? It doesn't say in this one, but in the other accounts we get the disciples were still confused. Why are they still confused? This is an example of derash thinking. They think Jesus Christ is speaking what? Metaphorically, euphemistically, in a Hebrew sense. And he's, we as logical Greek thinkers see it all as what? Pretty literal, like very Greek, very concrete. And it happens to be written in Greek. And so to us, we look at it and we go, What's wrong with these guys? What's wrong with them is their worldview, and that's what's supposed to be changing. In any case, then we get, the Eucharistic thing, the cup and the blood, the cup, the cup and the bread, which, by the way, is opposite of Jewish, which is very interesting, because in the Didache, which outlines early Christian doctrine, which is odd that it wasn't included in the New Testament, which, by the way, proves the New Testament is not a doctrinal document, because the Didache would obviously be in that. In the Didache, the wine comes before the bread. And also in Judaistic tin hodos, in Judaistic thought, the wine comes before the bread. But in all of the Christian Gospels, the bread comes before the wine. What do you think that points to? That directly points to Mysterion influence. Even at this point, they are obviously making accommodations. Because does it matter if the bread's first or the wine's first? In a Jewish household, it does big time. But in a Gentile household, it's not a big deal. These are beautiful historical markers that we see in the documents. But anyway, let's keep going. And also, I'll point this out. Without the lamb, the Passover is relatively meaningless, because this is a Passover meal, right? And we've already talked about why they can't have it. The Jews can't have it today, and you really can't have a Passover meal today. But do you note something? We always say that the Eucharist is a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. In our songs we say this. In most liturgical practice, it's right at the beginning. This is a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. Why do we have a sacrifice? The Jewish rabbis said that in the Messianic era, there would be only one sacrifice, and that is the sacrifice of thanksgiving. And in the sacrificial practice, you have the sacrifice of ascension, which, by the way, we do in our service. You have the sacrifice of sin or guilt, and actually there's 5 sacrifices. This is supposed to be 2 and 3. You have the sacrifice for the priest, and you have the sacrifice of thanksgiving. And the sacrifice of thanksgiving is very similar to the Passover sacrifice, because everyone eats it. The only problem is you have to get to here. In our view, theological view, how do we get there? Jesus Christ took care of this, he took care of this, he took care of this, because we are an ecclesia and not a synagogue. And therefore the only sacrifice required today is the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, which is represented by the Eucharistic Mass, Eucharistic ceremony, the Lord's Supper, as we call it. In any case, they went out, and now they're going out to the Mount of Olives. In 35, Peter declared, they make all these, in this section, all of the disciples make rational claims they will not keep, which is very interesting. So they've kind of got to the tripping point. All of them say, it says, this very night all of you will fall away on account of me, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd, the sheep of the flock will be scattered. And all of them say, including Peter, that they'll die for him, etc., etc. These are all rational decisions. But guess what they don't do? None of them follow through. In any case. And then here's a very confusing point, I think, that's very easy to make here. Then Jesus went with the disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said, sit and pray. And then he went and prayed. And when he prayed, my Father, it's possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Now, cup in Greek is one of the noted euphemisms in Greek. The cup means literally fate. It means my fate. So instead of using the word for fate, which would be pathos or chronos, the author uses specifically a word in Greek which means fate, but cannot be interpreted either as chronos, or pathos. And what's very interesting is, in the Greek view of the cup, what is quite obvious in this? You have to take up and drink from the cup. So you have to make a cognizant decision. So this isn't really fully what the Greeks would have thought of as faith, which is very interesting. I think it's important to note that Jesus is not afraid of the cross, and he's not bowing to faith.